You are listening to TBR Radio Presents the DIXIE Heritage Show, with your host, the Director of DIXIE Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
My guest today is retired Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Kennedy, who for a number of years was the Professor of Military History at the Army Staff College in Leavenworth, Kansas. And Colonel Kennedy was my guest on today's TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour. We were talking about the Korean War. But before we did that interview, Colonel Kennedy and I just sort of were having an informal conversation, and we were discussing several things that I know would be of interest to our audience here on the DIXIE Heritage Show. So for the next half hour, today's DIXIE Heritage Show is going to be that conversation that I had with Colonel Kennedy, and we'll be talking about the banning of the Confederate flag at Confederate military bases. We'll be talking about, I believe it's called the 1619 Project, the one where they try to begin American history, not with the Revolution in 1776, but, basically they're trying to say that American history started with slavery, blah, 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 all of that. And there were some other things that we talked about as well. We talked about some of the rioting and looting that's going on right now. We talked a little bit about the Confederate monument there in Alabama near Colonel Kennedy's home that he's fighting and advocating for. And we also talked about his conversations with the Army High Command and with people at the Pentagon, particularly as he is trying to defend his Confederate heritage to them. In fact, he just wrote a position paper that he presented to the military, basically explaining why our Confederate heroes were not traitors, as some of the top generals are trying to claim right now to justify the things that they're doing, such as changing base names and doing away with Confederate flags on bases and things of that nature. And so I think that you'll want to stay tuned. You had mentioned that you've been doing a lot of interaction with the local media because the Confederate monument in your area is coming under attack.
The left-wing radicals, we got Black Lives Matter is very active, and they have an Antifa group here. Both of them have joined together to tear the monument down. And 2 weeks ago, they threw red paint on it to get the city to move it, which is a ploy because Alabama laws says they cannot move that monument if it's been there more than 50 years. That's the law. So they're trying to skirt the law, and the city commission voted to move it, but legally they cannot. They said they have to pay a huge fine if they did. So we've got them over a barrel, but then today or yesterday, while we were having our press conference, the city commissioner or the county commissioner who owns the monument, sits on county property, said, well, we're going to have to move it in order to clean it, which is just a ploy to get around the law, because then they'll never put it back.
So where is the monument located?
It's at Madison County Courthouse, which is in the middle of Huntsville, Alabama. And Huntsville was occupied by the Yankees for 3 of the 4 years of the war. I mean, the spring of '62, they moved in and took over and didn't leave. So there's a lot of history here. We had 3,000 Confederate soldiers from this county go off to fight. 600 of them didn't return.
What exactly are you doing to try to protect the monument now? I know your Sons of Confederate Veterans Camp is involved in that, and maybe some other organizations are working with you as well.
Well, we started a new organization because Sons of Confederate Veterans is not supposed to get involved in politics, and this crosses the line somewhat. I mean, IRS could poke our eyes out and say, well, you're into politics, so we're now going to take you off your 501c3. So what we did is we formed a new group for North Alabama, all the counties in North Alabama, and we're all working together in a group called Heritage Protection North Alabama. It's a coalition of different groups. We have the UDC, the SCV, people that belong to other historical groups that don't want to get involved, like the SAR. They will not get involved. Civil War Roundtable, I'm the president now. They just made me the president by default. The other president resigned and left, went to Florida to retire. So I took her place. She said, we're not getting involved. Well, as soon as they made me the president, I immediately got involved and started writing letters to all these people and going to speak to the county commission. So that's only been a couple of weeks now.
You said that one of the county commissioners had basically issued a statement that they were going to move the monument. Do you think that they'll actually move forward with that, or do you have some kind of a legal vehicle that you're working to basically enforce the Monument Protection Act there in Alabama?
Well, we're going to go to the state and tell them it can be cleaned without moving it. So we're working now to find people who can clean it without moving it. That's just their ploy to get it out of there, because the commission buckled to Black Lives Matter. There's 7 members of the commission, the county commission. They all voted to move it. Well, they knew they couldn't legally do it. So then, to appease Black Lives Matter and all the leftists here, they said, we did what we could. And then the Black Lives Matter said, but you can appeal it to the Alabama Monuments Commission. So the commission got the appeal, and they promptly kicked it right back and said, we can't act on this. You know what the law says. So they knew what was going to happen. They knew that the commission at Montgomery in the Capitol would say, sorry, the law says you can't move it. So then we have a couple of commissioners who are left-wing radicals. One of them's black, and he just lost his election to a really left-wing radical black woman named Edwards, who at the county commission meeting on the 22nd of July said that it's an immoral law, therefore we can break it. And one of the other commissioners jumped on her with both feet and said, you're saying you're going to break your oath of office, and you haven't even taken your seat on the commission yet. And she was unrepentant. She stuck her chin out and said, yes. And he said, that's outrageous. You can't do that. Anyway, she doesn't care. But so that's what we're up against here.
So do you have anybody else going with you to the county commissioners meetings, or are you pretty much kind of the Lone Ranger on this?
Well, we've got a bunch of people that go. About 8 of us spoke at the last commission meeting. I mean, these are hardcore SCV guys, mostly from North Alabama. One of them grew up here, General Scales, who's retired here. And he's in our SCV camp, and he's a retired Army general. So he goes and he stuck his chin out at the monument yesterday, because we had 7 of us lined up to give a little spiel. Each one of us had a little talk to give with the press release, but he introduced it by getting up and explaining why the monument was significant as a soldier's monument. It wasn't built for racism or white supremacy, which is what they keep saying on the other side. It was built to keep blacks in their place. I mean, it's totally fallacious arguments, but that has a emotional ring to uneducated people. They think, oh yeah, that's white supremacy. So General Scales gave a great talk and led off while the rest of us followed him and briefed. One of the agitators got notified, and she ran down there. She's like a 5-year-old girl throwing a conniption fit. She was hollering and screaming and throwing her arms around. She's a 35-year-old woman and acting like a complete idiot. So they wouldn't even put her on the news. It was so bad. So I'm going to mention her at the next commission meeting, because we found out what her name is, and we looked on her Facebook page, and she's a political activist, a left-winger. She was amazing. She just pulled her cell phone out. She didn't have an original thought in her head. She started reading scripts from her cell phone. I'm going, this woman's a basket case, but she got a lot of attention because she was screaming and hollering.
So is she local, or is she just somebody that they imported in to be opposition?
Well, we haven't really figured out. She's got a Facebook page. It looks like she's been here for a while. But they have brought a bunch of imports in. We call them carpetbaggers. They don't live here,
right,
but they are residing here, at least temporarily. And we've identified a bunch of them. I have one of the guys in our group. We appointed him as the intelligence officer, and he goes looking for these people on Facebook and all these social media sites. And he's found out some incredible stuff, and just open source information. Plus, we call people that are in that area and say, do you know about this person? And they say, oh, yeah. They show up at every board meeting, and they don't have any visible means of support, no jobs, which means they're probably getting a dole from George Soros. That's what we're speculating.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
So when you and General Scales go and speak at one of these events, of course, you had a military career that, if you include your time as a professor of military history at the Army Staff College, stretched well over 40 years. And of course, General Scales, I'm sure, had a long career in the armed forces as well. One of the attacks or one of the arguments that's going to be thrown at you, of course, is that, well, this is a monument that was built to traitors. So how do you and General Scales answer that question?
Glad you asked that, because we've answered it. Actually wrote a paper that we sent to the Army Chief of Staff and to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who both claim they were traitors. Let me get my door real fast. My great neighbor, who's German, just brought some German bread to me. She knows I'm
the really dark, like brown or black bread?
No, this is actually much better. Thank you, Chrissy. She's very interesting. I've got her writing a book on her experiences. She escaped from East Germany when it was still communist. So going back to the traitor thing, I can email you what we sent to the Chief of Staff of the Army, because they're the ones that started pulling this traitor stuff out. And here's very shortly the 2-minute version. Why do you call them traitors? And they say, well, they broke away from the United States. Therefore, that means they're traitors. So we go back to the secession from the United States. And actually, up until 1860, we found the textbook used at West Point to teach the cadets. And that book, it absolutely says secession is a legal right. That argument had been made for years, and it was not settled. I mean, people argued against it, but a lot of people were arguing for it. So this fellow named William Rawle wrote a book, and it was used at West Point, and it's called A View of the Constitution. And it says in the book, the secession of a state depends on the will of the people of such a state. And then we have a number of other sources that go back saying that secession was never settled, that because the states entered into the Union voluntarily, they could leave voluntarily. So then, we argue you're using modern definitions of what is secession based on current law, not what was law in 1860. If secession was legal, if you follow the premise that it was legal, and that's what was being taught, then the Confederate States were a separate country, just as we broke away from England, became a separate country. So the people in our armed forces were no longer members of the British armed forces. They were Americans, and we had our own army, our own mint with our own currency. We had our own army and navy. It's not secession. If it's not secession, they cannot be traitors. So that's the argument we've been pushing on them. Now, the interesting thing, I found a 1960 letter that President Eisenhower wrote to a fellow who lived in New York, a dentist, who wrote him a letter and wanted to know why President Eisenhower kept a portrait of Robert E. Lee, who he called a traitor, why he would keep that portrait in the Oval Office. And Eisenhower's letter is online. I mean, it's there. And I have a copy of the letter that I made into a facsimile format of what it would look like on presidential letterhead. It's a copy of what it would look like. But the wording's all original. And what Eisenhower said was war between the states. He didn't call it a civil war. He called it a war between the states. He said secession was not settled. And these were, smart people on both sides of the argument. And he said Lee had a wonderful character that, should be emulated by people today. I mean, it's a great letter. And so I made a copy of that and sent it to these guys too.
So have you received any responses from anybody there in your efforts to advocate for the monument?
Well, here in town, we keep getting blown off. The commissioners don't like to see us come, but they don't like the Black Lives Matter even more than they like us, because those people are absolutely obnoxious. They're argumentative. They're nasty. They yell. They had a riot like in June. On the 5th of July, they had a riot, and the police had to use tear gas and rubber bullets on them. They're just out of control left-wing mob. And so the city commission's afraid of them. They are definitely afraid of these people. And of course, we behave ourselves. So, they don't feel intimidated by us. They just see us as a pain.
Extra, read all about it. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today. Extra, read all about it.
And the other advocacy that you've done there to the Army High Command, have you received any response from them?
I did. I sent an email to the Chief of Staff of the Army, and I sent him the attachments with these items in it, talking about, it was a single-page point paper talking about why they weren't traitors. He said he was going to read it. So I have to take him at his word, but that's the last I heard of it.
Okay.
So we're still punching them. The next Confederate Veteran magazine that comes out, the Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans asked me to head up a military committee. So I got some of these high-ranking officers that were retired, and I have a good friend of mine who's on active duty that feeds us information from these higher commands, and we can't even say his name because he'll get court-martialed or fired, lose his job. He's one of the insiders that helps us out. He tells us what's going on. We haven't gotten anything back, but in the next Confederate Veteran magazine, I wrote 3 postcards that they're going to put in the magazine. It comes out in a week or so. And the 3 cards, first one is to President Trump saying thank you for protecting our flag, because he's come out advocating for the Confederate flag, and for the monuments, which he says should not be moved or destroyed. So he's come out in favor of the monuments. And the other thing is not changing the names of the military installations in the South. He said, we're not changing the names. So we have a card in there for everybody to sign and send to the president. Then we have one to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he is a jerk. He's from Massachusetts, and he hates people in the South. And he's come out unequivocally. He said, these guys are all traitors. We need to change the names. He's said all sorts of awful things. So we got a card in there setting him straight, saying, you don't line up with the facts, what you're saying, and we talk about why they weren't traitors, Confederates weren't traitors. And then we're also sending one to the Chief of Staff of the Army. It just happens the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at this particular time is Army. The last one was a Marine. This guy's an Army guy. And the Army is the one that's really bad about it. They're virtue signaling. Look how nice we are. We're going to get rid of all the Confederates so that they, can get brownie points with whoever.
I think you'll also like the next upcoming issue, the September-October issue of the Barnes Review magazine. It's basically defending American heroes. And we have a number of articles that's going to be twice the length of a typical issue of the magazine. And we're going to have articles on Andrew Jackson, on Thomas Jefferson, on Robert E. Lee, on Stonewall Jackson.
Wow.
Yeah. We're going to go down the line, and then even going outside of, the realm of the South and the Confederacy, men like Father Junipero Sierra, who, a lot of his monuments and statues are coming down on the West Coast.
Yes. I couldn't believe that.
And
yes.
Yeah, so we are we're going all out to defend of the integrity of Christopher Columbus and
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
just George Washington and just all of these men who are coming under attack now.
Excellent.
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. Every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America. And we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
A friend of mine, who's a retired Army general, is a deputy to Betsy DeVos in the Department of Education, and they're fighting hard against this stuff. But because, the curriculums are all local, they're having a hard time.
Right.
Because now that 1619 project's being accepted for use in a lot of school districts. Most anti-American thing that's come up in the recent years.
I wanted to get your opinion on a couple of things, and one of them, of course, is, and now I'm having a senior moment.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
and I had a couple of big mental slips, and I said a few more of those, and I could probably run for president.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
Let me ask you the second one first, because I can remember it. What do you think of this Operation Warp Speed, essentially, using the Army to deliver a vaccine to the civilian population? At least to me, it seems like an act of aggression on the part of the administration if they actually go forward with it.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't think it's a good way to do business. I think, if nothing else, the perception is very bad. It sets a bad precedent.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
interesting is I found a colonel that lives down the road from us in Birmingham. He was a member of the SCV. He's retired Air Force colonel, and he's black, and he's just a great guy, great Christian, just a super guy, named Al Lassiter.
I'm guessing he's been advocating for keeping monuments, or he's just...
Yes, and he's on our committee, so when we write stuff to send it to the chief of staff and all, we always get his input, and he's always got some good ideas. He's just a heck of a nice guy.
Right. I know this wasn't one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, but it just popped into my head. You do realize that since the last time we've spoken that Colonel Jeb Stuart IV has passed away.
Yes, I saw that. Very sad. And he was a big advocate for the Confederacy. The sad thing is, so many of the sons and daughters now of these people are turning against us. They've gotten political correctness fever. People who, come from long lineage of Confederate heroes are just all of a sudden turning yellow on us. We have the great-grandson of Raphael Sims that lives here, and he's still a hardcore Confederate. I mean, he's a good guy. We had him speak at our camp, 3 months ago.
I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but it was in Winchester, Virginia, at Stonewall Jackson's command headquarters. And Mary Tyler Moore was there for the dedication of the renovation of all of that, and come to find out she was one of General Jackson's granddaughters. And there was a time. There was a time when people in Hollywood and celebrities and people in her position weren't afraid to, say Stonewall Jackson was my grandfather and throw $1 million at something.
Not that it really means anything, but he is my first cousin 8 times removed. My great-great-great-grandfather was his first cousin, Moses Jackson, who was a colonel in the 33rd Mississippi Infantry. They were first cousins, and I'm descended from Moses, so I'm indirectly, 1/500,000th related to Stonewall through my great-great-great-grandfather, who was Moses Jackson. I don't even know if they knew each other. It's one of those things that you read about. It's kind of interesting trivia.
Well, I just remember what it was that I wanted to ask you. And it was that the Secretary of Defense, Esper, basically wrote a directive that was banning the Confederate flag without naming the Confederate flag. And that was specifically after the Commander-in-Chief said to leave the Confederate flag in place.
Yes.
So how has he and, several other members of the Army brass, Navy brass, Air Force brass, Marine Corps brass, how are they not in direct defiance of the Commander-in-Chief, and how are those not court-martialable? Well, for Esper, it wouldn't be a court-martialable offense because he's a civilian. But for the men still in uniform, how is that not?
We've had that
explain
discussion.
how an army and how a military and an entire agency of government, the Department of Defense, can act in absolute defiance of the Commander-in-Chief.
We're hoping when he gets reelected, he'll fire Esper, because that guy essentially thumbed his nose at the president.
You still keep in touch with people in the military. Do you think that the current sentiment is held by the majority, or do you think that there is just a very vocal minority of leadership that just happens to be in the position to do these things without being challenged?
This all started, I think, with Obama. I think it's a small minority, but everyone else, I call them sheeple. People like sheep. They just follow along. If Esper says it's the right thing to do, their excuse is, well, we have to follow the orders. Well, what about Esper? The intent is as important as the specific order that the president gave. The intent was that the flags wouldn't be messed with, yet Esper turns around and bans them.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. Go to our website, www.dixieheritage.net. Check out also, while you're there, I'll send you a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. Flip over to TBR Radio's TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour, and Colonel Kennedy and I have a very interesting conversation on the Korean War. Until next week, God bless.